All right, cool. So today we're going to be continuing, obviously, our health reform study. But, of course, before we do that, of course, I close that. I didn't need to close that. Before we begin, let's bring up a little something, a little quote from Desire of Ages. All right. So, on Desire of Ages, page 239, paragraph 2, Sister White says, "Our standing before God depends not upon the amount of light we have received, but upon the use we make of what we have. Thus, even the heathen who choose the right as far as they can distinguish it are in a more favorable condition than those who have had great light and profess to serve God, but who disregard the light and by their daily life contradict their profession." So, this point, this teaching here, right? When we look at Luke chapter 2, verse 52, we see that it says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man," right? So, God does not expect every person to know everything. Everyone's always given an amount of light, and it's what we do with the light that has been given to us that determines how we are judged, right? And so as Sister White's pointing out here, even the heathen, they're viewed in a better light who are doing the best that they can with what they have than an individual who was not obeying with what they have, right? Which is why it's such a problematic situation when it comes to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. What do I mean? Well, Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 to 17 says, "I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Because thou sayest, I am rich, and increase with goods, and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched, and miserable, and poor, and blind, and naked." So just like Jesus in his life when he grew, right? Because he had to grow as we do, as individuals, right? He had to learn wisdom continuously by coming to the scriptures, by, listening to his mother teach, especially when he was a child. He had to continuously grow by going out in prayer. In the same way that Christ grew is in the same way that we need to grow as individuals. We look to him as our example, looking to him daily, and also learning the lessons that need to be learned from the scriptures, right? And also from Spirit of Prophecy as well. So these individuals here, when it talks about these lukewarm individuals, right? So Christ is saying here that the individuals that are most repulsive to him in this situation are those who are lukewarm, right? Now you could go to a deeper study, but keeping it short, right? The individuals who are in a situation where they are cold, we're talking about individuals who are not really following Christ, right? They're not really zealous. They're not really following his truth as they should be, right? They don't really have it. They don't have the zeal. In addition, there are individuals who are hot, those who have the truth and they're very zealous for the truth, right? But the kinds of individuals that Christ does not like, mostly, right? When we say don't like, it doesn't mean he doesn't love individuals because he loves everyone, right? But the kind of individuals that are most repulsive to Christ are those who have the truth and don't have corresponding works with the truth. And so, like what Sister White said, the picture that is painted with the individuals who have the light and the blaze of truth, and this is why it's such a problem when it comes to the SDA church. Yep, indeed, bearing a talent, right? But it's such a problem with the SDA church where there's so much light that is had from, not just, of course, the Bible and the foundations of the faith that has been given to us, but also through the blessings of Sister White's writings, the light that continues to shine upon us in regards to health reform, which we're getting ready to get into, or more into, right? And among other things as well, right? And so, to God, that is actually worse than not having had the light. Right? And in the condition of the Jews, when Christ came the first time, the condition of the Jews was such that they were doing worse than the heathen were doing. And unfortunately, for many Adventists, that very same truth can be stated, right? And so what is the remedy? Of course, the remedy is we turn to Christ. Revelation 3:18-20, chapter 3, verse 18-21. I counsel thee to buy of me gold tried in the fire. Buy it of whom? Buy it of Christ. Buy of Jesus gold tried in the fire. And if you buy it from Christ, as he teaches us to look upon him, right? As he's lifted up, right? That thou mayest be rich, and white raiment, that thou mayest be clothed. Whose raiment do we gather but Christ's, right? That thou mayest be clothed, and that the shame of thy nakedness do not appear, and anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see, right? Who can see greater, who walked on earth as a man, than Christ, right? And then Jesus says, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. And just quickly, our side note here, when he says as many as he loves, he's not necessarily saying that there's others that he doesn't love. But this word love here is more of like brotherly love, like those who he's in a closer relationship with. As many as those that he loves, he rebukes and chastens, right? And then he tells us to be zealous, therefore, and repent. Behold, says he, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him, and he with me. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame and am set down with my Father in his throne. All right. So with that said, let's now start looking over some health aspects. So we are in chapter 20. I do believe we're in chapter 20. Yeah, chapter 20. And we are now talking about soda and baking soda. And last, we were talking about condiments. And so we are here now discussing more health points in regards to condiments or even things put into food as well, right? So, Sister White says in this, which is part 2, soda and baking powder. There we go. She says the use of soda or baking powder in bread making is harmful and unnecessary. Soda causes inflammation of the stomach and often poisons the entire system. Many housewives think that they cannot make good bread without soda, but this is an error. If they would take the trouble to learn better methods, their bread would be more wholesome, and to a natural taste, it would be more palatable. All right, so of course, making bread is something that's going to require time and effort. That's the point here, right? Sister White also says hot biscuit raised with soda or baking powder should never appear upon our tables. Such compounds are unfit to enter the stomach. Hot raised bread of any kind is difficult of digestion. She also says graham gems, which are both wholesome and palatable, may be made from the unbolted flour, mixed with pure cold water and milk. But it is difficult to teach our people simplicity. When we recommended graham gems, our friends say, oh yes, we know how to make them. We are much disappointed when they appear, raised with baking powder or with sour milk and soda. These give no evidence of reform. The unbolted flour mixed with pure soft water and milk makes the best gems we ever tasted. If the water is hard, use more sweet milk or add an egg to the batter. Gems should be thoroughly baked in a well-heated oven with a steady fire. And so some of what she's saying here is a bit of things that we have heard before, but this is kind of getting its own section. Just kind of establishing the fact that baking soda and baking powder are not to be used, right? These things are not to be used. Continue, she says, in my travels, I see entire families suffering with sickness in consequence of poor cooking. Sweet, nice, healthful bread is seldom seen upon their tables. Yellow saleratus biscuits and heavy, clammy bread are breaking down the digestive organs of tens of thousands. Some do not feel that it is a religious duty to prepare food properly. Hence, they do not try to learn how. They let the bread sour before baking. And the saleratus, added to remedy the cook's carelessness, makes it totally unfit for the human stomach. And finally, she says we see sallow complexions and groaning dyspeptics wherever we go. When we sit at the tables and eat the food cooked in the same manner as it has been for months, and perhaps years, I wonder that these persons are alive. Bread and biscuit are yellow with saleratus. This resort to saleratus was to save a little care. In consequence of forgetfulness, the bread is often allowed to sour before baking, and to remedy the evil, a large portion of saleratus is added, which only makes it totally unfit for the human stomach. Saleratus, in any form, should not be introduced into the stomach, for the effect is fearful. It eats the coatings of the stomach, causes inflammation, and frequently poisons the entire system. Some plead, I cannot make good bread or gems unless I use soda or saleratus. You surely can, if you become a scholar and will learn. Is not the health of your family of sufficient value to inspire you with ambition to learn how to cook and how to eat? And right, so the point being, of course, when it comes to cooking and eating, it's something that we should consider and take. It's something that obviously should be taken into consideration, right? Now, it's not always that one must eat raised bread or they have to eat raised bread often, right? Because as we've gone over, unleavened bread is a healthy thing to eat, and you can sit there and you can eat unleavened bread rather than even raised bread if you would like, right? And you can even fresh and warm from the oven, right? But the point being that whatever you're putting into your stomach, and especially whatever you're putting into the stomach of your family members, you should take it. You should be wise with it, right? Obviously, make the best choices that you can with what you have. You should just learn how to cook whatever it is that you have, whatever is in your country, right? Sister White talks a lot about the use of bread, right? But that's for a lot of people like us that like maybe we tend to use bread or make bread very often, right? But if you think of specific countries, right, where individuals rely more upon rice, well, a similar kind of thought process is going to apply, that they make sure that the food that they choose is going to be healthy, right? Instead of eating white rice, eating rice that's going to be brown rice or even red rice, rice that still has the bran attached, right? It's not that sometimes you couldn't have white rice, but that it's much better to have rice that has the outside of it still upon it, because it is better for our digestion, better for fiber, etc. And of course, if we continue to experiment with these things, then we will be blessed, right? As long as we're obedient to God and we're praying. So, the next part is salt. Salt. And Sister White says, do not eat largely of salt. Avoid the use of pickles and spiced foods. Eat an abundance of fruit, and the irritation that calls for so much drink at mealtime will largely disappear. And so Sister White is pointing out that there are times when people, at meal times, they're going to feel like they want something to drink. And Sister White's point is that is happening because there is something that is causing that irritation where you're eating food and you're like, man, I need to drink something. And the point that she's making is the reasons for this are individuals use too much salt. That's one. Another is that individuals are using pickles or spiced foods. And she points out that if one actually had an abundance of fruit, and in this case, she's talking about fresh fruit, right? But if one has an abundance of fruit, it alleviates that feeling or that desire to drink something with your meals, right? As it's supposed to be that we're not really drinking water and things like that throughout our meals, or during our meals, right? What ends up happening is if you drink too much, obviously if you're drinking it, maybe if someone takes a sip here, maybe they're not going to see that much of an issue, right? But if someone has like a full 2 cups of water in the middle of their meal, trying to wash it down or something else like that, or because they're so irritated whilst they're eating, well, that's a problem that shouldn't be happening that way, right? Continuing, she says, food should be prepared in such a way that it will be appetizing as well as nourishing. Again, that's a simple point. Both these things go together, right? It's not, we don't just want food that's nourishing. We want it appetizing. We want something that tastes good. It should not be robbed of that which the system needs. I use some salt and always have, because salt, instead of being deleterious, is actually essential for the blood. And she says, at one time, Dr. Blank tried to teach our family cook according to health reform as he viewed it, without salt or anything else to season the food. Well, I determined to try it. But I became so reduced in strength that I had to make a change, and a different policy was entered upon with great success. I tell you this because I know that you're in positive danger. Food should be prepared in such a way that it will be nourishing. It should not be robbed of that which the system needs. I use some salt and always have, because from the light given me by God, this article, in the place of being deleterious, is actually essential for the blood. The whys and wherefores of this I know not, but I give you the instruction as it is given to me. Right? And so Sister White, even herself, she's not understanding necessarily all the principles behind, why it is necessary to add salt into our food. But she's just explaining that, look, this is what has been revealed to me. I've done this with great success. The same is going to be said for anyone else, right? The idea of like a no salt diet when it comes to foods, right? Let's say someone's making bread and they're using no salt, or somebody is making like some beans or something like that and they're using no salt. What you end up having, or what you end up running into, is you can run into this issue where the food begins to taste insipid or tasteless, right? And obviously, again, we don't want food to be in that kind of position. We don't want it to be where it's insipid or tasteless. Part 4 of chapter 20. Yeah, these parts and these sections in chapter 20 is actually not really that long. All right, pickles and vinegar. In this fast age, the less exciting the food, the better. Condiments are injurious in their nature. Mustard, pepper, spices, pickles, and other things of a like character irritate the stomach and make the blood feverish. I was seated once at the table with several children under 12 years of age. Meat was plentifully served, and then a delicate, nervous girl called for pickles. A bottle of chow chow, fiery with mustard and pungent with spices, was handed her, from which she helped herself freely. The child was proverbial for her nervousness and irritability of temper, and these fiery condiments were well calculated to produce such a condition. The mince pies and pickles, which should never find a place in any human stomach, will give a miserable quality of blood. The blood-making organs cannot convert spices, mince pies, pickles, and diseased flesh meats into good blood. And this quote is one we've seen before, likely. Do not eat largely of salt and avoid the use of pickles and spiced foods. Eat an abundance of fruit, and the irritation that calls for so much drink at mealtime will largely disappear. Yeah, we saw that earlier, right? And then on vinegar, the salads are prepared with oil and vinegar. Fermentation takes place in the stomach, and food does not digest, but decays or putrefies. As a consequence, the blood is not nourished, but becomes filled with impurities, and the liver and kidney difficulties appear. So that's a warning about the usage of vinegar. I know that a lot of times if you go into a store and you try to buy store-bought bread, and you look at the ingredients, and on store-bought bread, one of the ingredients for a lot of them is grain vinegar, right? And so because of that, just avoid. I tend to just avoid that altogether. Maybe you can find a bread that doesn't have that, right? I cannot think of what it's. I might be able to remember what this store's name is, but I'm thinking of one where it's like I've gone in and like they had bread, raised bread that was pretty simple. It was just wheat, salt, yeast, and honey. So it's like some honey wheat bread, and it was a very, very, very simple raised bread. Right. So learning even to make something like that is useful. I see there is typing. I'll let the typing continue. Even simple foods from stores have harmful ingredients. We need to read the labels or use you and scan the barcodes. Yeah, so definitely reading labels is a good thing to do, to try to pay attention to the kinds of things that are inside that which we've bought, right? Or that which we're looking to buy. It's very important to look at the labels. Because for a lot of these things, right, maybe we get to a position where it's like, okay, we don't buy these things ourselves, but maybe we see a bar or something like that in the store. And you got to be careful, like make sure you read the ingredients list so that you're not missing something and you actually end up eating something that you would otherwise be trying to avoid, right? Alrighty. All right. Well, that's the end of chapter 20. Pretty short. That's the end. That's the end of that one. So we'll move on to chapter 21. And now we're going to talk about butter. We're going to talk about butter. So part 1, butter. Simon says, if you can't pronounce it, it probably isn't good. All right, butter. Progressive reform. Let the diet reform be progressive. Let the people be taught how to prepare food without the use of milk or butter. Tell them that the time will soon come when there will be no safety in using eggs, milk, cream, or butter, because disease in animals is increasing in proportion to the increase of wickedness among men. The time is near when, because of the iniquity of the fallen race, the whole animal creation will groan under the diseases that curse our earth. Question: have you ever heard of, like, maybe meat-induced or allergy-induced tachycardia? Have you ever heard of that? Maybe once? You think in another form. I'll say something as an American, right? I came across a post from someone on Instagram. And they were talking about that they were they developed allergies in the U.S. They developed some allergies in the U.S. And let me just read somebody real quick. But anyways, they developed some allergies in the U.S. And these allergies were, they had an allergy when they ate meat. And what it would cause is tachycardia in them. So essentially that means your heart rate raises, it elevates. For her, it was her heartbeat was beating at 120 beats per minute. Now she did something interesting, right? Because she's also somebody that could live in the Philippines. And she lived in the Philippines for a year. And what she noticed is that when she ate flesh there, she didn't have the tachycardia. But like clockwork, as soon as she came back to the States and she had meat, it came right back. So, this isn't to say, of course, that one should be eating meat or anything else like that. Or people, yeah, obviously we should be moving in the direction to get away from meat. But the point being is that disease in animals, or the animals not being raised properly, etc., that is translating to the human. And especially the way we mass farm things here in the USA and all the injections that are given to these animals, etc., this is severely, severely makes it far more dangerous to ever eat the flesh of dead animals, right? So when it comes to individuals in America, it actually becomes more paramount here for individuals to discard with meat at once than maybe in some other kinds of countries where this type of the way they produce the meat in this case is not the same, right? And this person's thought process was, maybe it's not just that. What their thought process is, it's not just the meat, but they have allergies to. They're thinking that allergies to other things that people develop in the USA, if they try it from another place, it's not going to be as problematic, right? So the thought process there, again, not to say that one should be eating meat, but the thought process there is that it's very clear, like when there's disease, etc., that is coming upon an individual because of the animal products that are eaten, whether it be the meat or whether it be the stuff that's going on with the dairy, etc. It's good to exclude it from the diet. Individuals that don't have it mass factory farmed the way that things are in the United States of America are actually going to be in just a safer position than individuals in America. But individuals in America are going to be expected to turn quicker and much more to a diet that is more plant-based than other individuals that are outside of the United States of America, right? So, we definitely should all be and get to that point where we're excluding meat from our diets here in USA and even in other countries, right? But always you want to make it to the point where you're reaching the people where they are. See where they are in their country, what they subsist upon in terms of food, and how you could possibly help them to make better choices. Sister White says, God will give his people ability and tact to prepare wholesome food without these things. Without what things? Without the use of eggs, milk, cream, or butter. She says, let our people discard all unwholesome recipes. So all unwholesome recipes should be discarded with, but those things which were had, and this was written in 1902, right? Those things which were had then, eggs, milk, cream, and butter, it was not necessary for there to be a complete dismissal of all of these things. Now let's look. This quote probably should have been attached to it, but that's okay. Ooh, that didn't copy the way I wanted it to. Butter is less harmful when eaten on cold bread than when used in cooking. But as a rule, it is better to dispense with it altogether. Right? So here's a little rule when it comes to butter. Again, when it comes to the States, I could see how we are just dispensing with this altogether completely. But in individuals in different places, there is a bit of leeway. But that leeway obviously is going to depend. And Sister White will explain more about that. But Sister White says of this subsection, replacing with olives, cream, nuts, and health foods. And Sister White says olives may be so prepared as to be eaten with good results at every meal. Remember, this is a thing we talked about, right? When she's talking about every meal, it is possible to have the olives to cross over to on both sides, whether it be with a meal of fruits or with a meal with vegetables, right? So there are some foods that cross that boundary line, right? And she says the advantages sought by the use of butter may be obtained by eating of properly prepared olives. The oil in the olives relieves constipation and for consumptives, and for those who have inflamed, irritated stomachs, it is better than any drug. So you know someone with stomach issues? Put to them olives. She says, as a food, it is better than any oil coming secondhand from animals. So in other words, are olives a fruit? Yes. Olives are a fruit. She also says, when properly prepared olives, like nuts, supply the place of butter and flesh. Okay. When properly prepared olives, like nuts, supply the place of butter and flesh meats. Properly prepared. The oil, as eaten in the olive, is far preferable to animal oil or fat. It serves as a laxative. It will be found beneficial to consumptives, and it is healing to an inflamed, irritated stomach. I think these quotes are interesting and may be useful for some individuals. You have truffle olive oil. I don't know what that means. Truffle is a mushroom, but it's very rare and expensive. Sorry about that on the stream. My internet had a momentary glitch. Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen again. Truffle is a mushroom, but it's very rare and expensive. So it's a mixture of truffle and olive? The oil is infused with truffle. I suppose maybe it being rare, but maybe it's got some benefit to it. Yeah. Bro says maybe. All right. Continuing, Sister White says the health food business is in need of means and of the active cooperation of our people, that it may accomplish the work it ought to do. Its purpose is to supply the people with food which will take the place of flesh meat, and also milk and butter, which, on account of diseases of cattle, are becoming more and more objectionable. So Sister White's pointing out here, not that it was necessary for them to discard for those things at that time, but that it was necessary for the people, especially the health food industry, to try to figure out how can we prepare foods that don't require these things. Now, of course, that's a lot easier today than it was in her day, right? We've got things like oat milks and nut milks, etc., that get infused with certain things. Maybe they get like added vitamin B12 and things of that nature that will help supply the lack. So the way to supply the lack is there for us today, right? It is there to supply the lack today. All right. Not best for children. And Sister White says children are allowed to eat flesh meat, spices, butter, cheese, pork, rich pastry, and condiments generally. They are also allowed to eat irregularly in between meals of unhealthful food. These things do their work of deranging the stomach, exciting the nerves to unnatural action, and enfeebling the intellect. Parents do not realize that they are sowing the seed which will bring forth disease and death. And of course, what Sister White is saying is very true. It's just an unrealized fact, right? They're not realizing that they're sowing that which is later going to cause disease in individuals. And these individuals, unfortunately, being their children. Okay. Uh-oh. why that happens sometimes. All right. The free use obstructs digestion. The Sister White says, butter should not be placed on the table, for if it is, some will use it too freely, and it will obstruct digestion. But for yourself, you should occasionally use a little butter on cold bread, if this will make the food more appetizing. This would do far less harm than to confine yourself to preparations of food that are not palatable. So, this is something that we've discussed, or we had this point brought up before, right? In general, Sister White is discouraging the use of butter. Now, discouraging does not mean that, how do I word this properly? That she's condemning individuals using it, right? Because in such an instance such as this, right, she's making it very clear that for this individual, it is better to use butter, cold butter, right? Use butter and put it on cold bread, not hot bread, but cold bread, and that it would be far less harmful to do that than it would be to confine themselves to preparations of food that are not palatable. And so again, one of the things that's very important in health reform is not just that the food is nourishing, but that you enjoy what you're eating. Right? At this point, I've said it multiple times, we've read it multiple times, right? But it's a point about health that I don't think people tend to really think about. Maybe when you're a child, or at least maybe for me, you might feel like for something to be healthy, it just tastes not good or not the greatest, right? And it's unfortunate that that's the kind of way that certain things like that are pictured, but that's what we want to strive away from. We want health foods, but we want them to taste good. If this would make the food more appetizing, key. Yep. So it is an important factor when it comes to let it taste good. Right? Even, it's like what we discussed when it came to sanitarium individuals. They were permitted to have their food be a little richer than what Sister White or the others would normally eat, right? And it's to taking natural health foods, but giving them to a bit more richness than what health reformers would do. Brother Wiki says, the enjoyment of eating is part of healthy eating, but the enjoyment of plain food increases as we abstain from stimulating food. Right. Yep. But of course, plain food, right? And the thought process of plain food, it's not whole wheat flour with water only, right? Or vegetables with water only, right? The idea of plain food is just, it's a dismissal of condiments. It is a dismissal of things that are bad, right? Whereas if somebody takes, let's say they like kale and they like to boil it in water and some oat milk and some salt, that's perfectly fine. I can eat a plain potato now and enjoy it more than ever. As before, I couldn't do this and wouldn't be wise to have done it. Yeah, I don't think I am in a position to even attempt that. Yeah. Now, if it's sweet potato, maybe, but a regular potato, right? Or at the very least, if I'm eating a plain potato, it has to have salt, right? The thought process would be salt it. Well, I guess if that's the case, right? As I'm thinking of, maybe I'm thinking of plain, or we're saying plain a little differently, but yeah. Salt, if it's just a plain potato and then you have some salt on it, makes it taste so much better. So much better. There's no harm in also adding a little, maybe there's like some oat cream or something like that. That's out there, right? Maybe it's something that can be looked at. Maybe that's something that can be looked at because there's like dry milk powder, right? The same can be done with oat milk for like oat milk powder that can be added to certain things. All right. Cheese made from cashews and nutritional yeast. All right. When the purest butter cannot be obtained. Okay. She says, I eat but 2 meals a day and still follow the light given me 35 years ago. She's writing this in 1903. She says, I use no meat. As for myself, I have settled the butter question. I do not use it. This question should be settled in every place where the purest article cannot be obtained. Stipulation. We have 2 good milch cows, a Jersey and a Holstein. I do not know what she's saying there. We use cream and all... I think that's actually referring to the cows. We use cream and all are satisfied with this. So, she's talking about, that, of course, the use of butter, if it can't be pure, it's gotten rid of, right? The main thing that Sister White used, her and her family, was cream. Bell peppers, tomatoes, and nutritional yeast. All right. Sorry. Sometimes I copy things that I shouldn't. Also, I'll say, does anyone want to assist in reading? At least finishing. All right. Let me read this paragraph and then I'll pass it to you. You can finish the rest. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's like 8 paragraphs. Oops. Oops. Accidentally deleted that. All right. Not to be classed with flesh meat. And she says milk, eggs, and butter should not be classed with flesh meat. In some cases, the use of eggs is beneficial. The time has not come to say that the use of milk and eggs should be wholly discarded. Again, this is 1902. She says there are poor families whose diet consists largely of bread and milk. They have little fruit and cannot afford to purchase the nut foods. In teaching health reform, as in all other gospel work, we are to meet the people where they are. Until we can teach them how to prepare health reform foods that are palatable, nourishing, and yet inexpensive, we are not at liberty to present the most advanced propositions regarding health reform diet. It is so important, right? You have to meet people where they are, regardless of whether it's people that are in your family or whether that's people that are not in your family. You have to meet the people where they are, right? And as we're going to see, right, it is important that you even need to be sure to allow people to follow and act out their own convictions of duty. We have 6 chickens and our eggs are very healthy. Let me put in the next few paragraphs. Brother Will, if you're ready, this is the first 3 and there's going to be 5 more afterwards.
All right. It says, allow others their convictions. 588. We must remember that there are a great many different minds in the world, and we cannot expect everyone to see exactly as we do in regard to all questions of diet. Minds do not run in exactly the same channel. I do not eat butter, but there are members of my family who do. It is not placed on my table, but I make no disturbance because some members of my family choose to eat it occasionally. Many of our conscientious brethren have butter on their tables, and I feel under no obligation to force them to do otherwise. These things should never be allowed to cause disturbance among brethren. I cannot see the need of butter where there is abundance of fruit and of sterilized cream. Those who love and serve God should be allowed to follow their own convictions. We may not feel justified in doing as they do, but we should not allow differences of opinion to create disunion. 589. I cannot see that you are I cannot see but that you are trying your best to live out the principles of health reform. Study economy in everything, but do not withhold from the diet food which the system needs. In regard to the nut foods, there are many who cannot eat them. If your husband enjoys dairy, butter, let him eat it until he is convinced that this is not best for his health. Caution against extremes. There is danger that in presenting the principles of health reform, some will be in favor of bringing in changes that would be for the worse instead of the better. Health reform must not be urged in a radical manner. As the situation now is, we cannot say that milk and eggs and butter should be entirely discarded. We must be careful to make no innovations because, under the influence of extreme teaching, there are conscientious souls who will surely go to extremes. Their physical appearance will injure the cause of health reform, for few know how to properly supply the place of that which they discard. 591. While warnings have been given regarding the dangers of disease through butter and the evil of the free use of eggs by small children, yet we should not consider it a violation of principle to use eggs from hens that are well cared for and suitably fed. Eggs contain properties that are remedial agencies in counteracting certain poisons. Some, in abstaining from milk, eggs, and butter, have failed to supply the system with proper nourishment, and as a consequence, have become weak and unable to work. Thus, health reform is brought into disrepute. The work that we have tried to build up solidly is confused with strange things that God has not required, and the energies of the church are crippled. But God will interfere to prevent the results of these two strenuous ideas. The gospel is to harmonize the sinful race. It is to bring the rich and poor together at the feet of Jesus. All right. 592. The poor say, when health reform is presented to them, what shall we eat? We cannot afford to buy the nut foods. As I preach the gospel to the poor, I am instructed to tell them to eat that food which is most nourishing. I cannot say to them, you must not eat eggs or milk or cream. You must use no butter in the preparation of food. The gospel must be preached to the poor, and the time has not yet come to prescribe the strictest diet. God will guide. But I wish to say that when the time comes that it is no longer safe to use milk, cream, butter, and eggs, God will reveal this. No extremes in health reform are to be advocated. The question of using milk and butter and eggs will work out its own problem. At present, we have no burden on this line. Let your moderation be known unto all men.
Amen, brother. Thank you. So, question: what do we think? Are we in the time where it is no longer safe to use milk, cream, butter, and eggs? To the chat. Several people are typing that statement. Personally, I think so. Yes, I would say yes. One more typing. Oh, some more typing. Today, if you or someone personally doesn't raise it, it may not be safe. Yes, we are in those days. You know, what's interesting about that statement, if somebody you don't... English. If you don't know the chickens that are being raised, probably not wise to eat the eggs, right? As in Brother Cyberman's case, like he pointed out, he has 6 chickens, and that they eat the eggs of those chickens that are well cared for. Now, in Sister White's statement and thought process is that we ought not to view eggs as a violation of principle if they come from hens suitably cared for, right? It's just so easy not to do it now, so it's the best time. Yes, I would agree with that. Now would be the best time to dismiss these things, right? Now, of course, in general, when it comes to, like when you're going to the store and getting these things are not good, right? But let's say now you're dealing with very poor individuals. How should you go about it when you're dealing with very poor individuals? I'm going to give you an example as you think, how should you deal with it when it comes to very poor individuals? But I know a woman with kids that lives not in this country, and during COVID, at one point she was forced to go out into the forests to try to somehow find food for her and her family. Brother Wiki says, no laying the most advanced ideas. Just eat the best food you can. It's tough case. The plant-based foods are cheap. Beans are cheap. Rice is cheap. Veggies can be cheap. It's tough because the plant-based foods are cheap. I believe at this time it is not bad to learn about mushrooms. So... yeah, the idea of just be careful with what you present. While I don't think I would have a problem approaching even a poor individual and telling them that it is best for them to remove flesh meats from their diet, even today, the ideas of milk, eggs, butter, things of that nature, I think it's still somewhat of a case-by-case basis, especially, again, when you have individuals who cannot obtain that which is going to be needful for their health, right? So here in America, it's very easy for me to go to the store and get some oat milk that's got some B12 and some other vitamins and things like that, right? That's a simple thing for me to do, but that's not always the case for other individuals, because for other individuals, in order to go to the store, they have to ride, some vehicle that will take them into the city because they live in a province where they have to raise and grow their own food and things of that nature, right? So it's like third world problems versus a first world country problem they're not going to be the same. And it's not going to be viewed the same. And we have to keep that in mind. It's easier for us here in the USA, for example, or even in the UK, right, to look at health reform and be like, discard all of this. Because you can just go to your local grocery store and you can grab these things that are going to be used to replace these things for our meals, right? But the simple fact of the matter is that there are individuals who are not yet at a position where they can do the same things as us, and we must take it the same. We still have to approach them with the same care as if they were living in, you could say like the 1800s or something else like that, right? It is important to meet the people where they are. The most important food to be given up in this time is, and it's the one question that is going to be the most important. What's the one thing that is most important that needs to be discarded? Flesh. I wouldn't even say really sugar, right? I'm not going to say sugar is not... flesh, specifically flesh, right? Yeah, we could work with people in not misusing sugar, right? But misuse of sugar is different than giving up sugar, right? The important part that we really want to drive people from is flesh, because that is the article of diet that people will more likely be sustaining themselves on. Will people sustain themselves on rich cakes? I doubt it. But will they use it? Yes. People will use rich cakes. But in America, you're far more likely to see a diet where you have meat in all three meat in all three meals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as opposed to rich cakes. I am confused on what is rich cakes. Rich cakes are things that are really high in fat and sugar. So if you're making a cake, for example, literally a cake, or pastries or things like of that nature, and it's really high in fat and sugar. Additionally, in the former days, you'll have fat and sugar, and you'll also have like milk being mixed in with that as well, right? So it's going to be really bad for you, right? But while it is okay when dealing with individuals who are just turning to health reform for their food to be a little richer than you would eat it, the idea is you don't want it to have tons of fat and tons of sugar, because that is just going to hinder digestion, right? When we use things like olive oil, it's useful, right? But only in so much that you're not pouring the whole bottle of olive oil into it and just being like, well, it's olives, it's good for you. Yeah, but still, you're still just a bunch of fat, right? When it comes to nuts, which are fat foods, right? Sister White even encouraged like you use a sixth to a tenth of the recipe that has these nut foods because they're so high in fat. They're so difficult to digest. Can I say something or should I wait till then? Yeah, if it relates, you can. You can. Sorry.
Um. So the thing with speaking of poor people, right, is from looking at the situation, it seems that healthy food is even cheaper, right? If you know what to look for, you know what to think about, right? So in the global economic sphere, right? I speak to someone in Africa, right? And they're poor, very poor. And the poorer they are during the month is the less meat they eat. If they're really struggling, they don't eat any meat because the meat is what's expensive. So now you're looking at them, they're just eating the rice and the vegetables or the rice and the ground provisions and stuff like that, right? And then on the like the flip side here at home, you have, you know, beans and all of these different things. Like if you know what you're looking for, I think back in the day in Ellen White's time, there was, you know, meat was richer, and then the milk and the eggs were for the poorer people right now. Whereas we're in a place where meat is less expensive. So, you know, that's something that we could tell the poor people about meat being less expensive, right? I think the biggest problem is the food deserts where they can't get the vegetables, but they can get the staples, which are also as cheap or cheaper than the meats. Even yeah, so that's I just wanted to say that like it's a whole different paradigm.
So, thanks, bro. So what I would say, right, is definitely the meats should be discarded, especially when it comes to the poorer individuals. Now I can see how maybe you might want to feel hesitant when you're dealing with super poor individuals. Like the example I gave before, like having a friend like during COVID, like what is she gonna do to eat? So she has to literally go into a forest to try to find foods to eat for her family, and it's just kind of like that's not the most ideal situation, right? So the things of that nature, right? While I would say yes in terms of meat, I think that's easier, right, to say discard with that. It gets different when you start talking about butter. It gets different when you start talking about milk and things of that nature, right? Those kinds of things that trying to tell individuals, oh, don't use milk, just use oat milk. right? What if they don't have oat milk, right? So it's like, or what if they don't have almond milk where they are, right? But the one says, what I'm saying is I'm not hesitant to tell them let go of meat because it's cheaper without it. Yeah. And I think I put that depends in the room, but I think I can understand the point when it comes to meat. It becomes harder when you start incorporating more than meat. When you start saying also, well, let's consider butter, well, let's consider milk, well, let's consider eggs, right? Because those things are objectively better than eating the flesh of dead animals. And sure, they can dismiss meat, but now they're also learning to cook with milk. They're still using milk in their food. They're still using eggs. They're still using butter. And these kinds of things, we can't really press them if they cannot replace them. The real issue would be initially then making sure their food is appetizing. Appetizing and nourishing. Those two things. Brother J. Ron says, sorry, did you say Ellen White said not to eat so much nuts and olives? Yes, so Sister White says that when it comes to nuts, you want it to form like a sixth to a tenth of a recipe, right? So if you have a recipe, if you have it by, my thought process is by volume, not by weight, but by volume, a sixth to a tenth. So if you have like, yeah, let's just say by volume 1,000 milliliters, sorry, it would be less than a third, so a sixth, like 16 something percent, down to 10% of nuts that are going to be used in comparison to everything else. And it's because the nut foods, right, they are more, especially in energy, it's more than twice the amount that you get from other kinds of foods. More than twice the amount. Vegetarian foods are becoming expensive here. I agree with that if you mean... So the unfortunate fact is that vegan and vegetarian restaurants are actually more expensive than other restaurants. If I go to a restaurant that's a vegetarian restaurant, paying 18... I showed the avocado toast thing, where it's like 2 slices of avocado toast is almost $20, right? And it's just like, it's so expensive to eat it at a store, at a restaurant like that, right? But then you try to take it... Then you try to take it in another way, or another... Sorry, I saw a message, kind of distracted, but... what was I saying? Sorry. Yeah, it's better to make these... Thank you. It's better to make these foods at home, right? As opposed to, getting them at a restaurant. But also, and just another point to be made too, right, is that vegetarian kinds of foods that are like actually healthier, if you buy like bars and stuff like that, their price is really high. So even if it's not restaurant food, if you're buying like bars and stuff like that, food products that are made, right, it's expensive, right? Now, buying whole wheat flour by itself, yeah, that's not going to be really expensive, right? Many regular restaurants are now making vegetarian dishes simple but delicious. I would have to see that. I honestly would have to see that, right? Because where I've been, well, I don't regular any restaurant to begin with, so I guess I don't really, see the vegetarian scene exploding in certain restaurants, right? The only type of restaurant that I've been in lately is a vegetarian kind of restaurant, and that was years ago, or at least ordered from, yeah? And it's still very expensive. But the idea that a restaurant is making vegetarian dishes simple but delicious, I don't know. I'd have to see, right? I'd have to see. Now, if we say a vegetarian dish like salad, sure. Sure, why not? But I'm not heading to our local McDonald's for a salad. All right. So, with that said, Will, there's simple questions. These should be very, very simple. Not a lot. What is less harmful when it's used with cooking, but still better to be dispensed with? Why did I word it like that? You already know what I was talking about, but I don't understand. What is less harmful when it is used with cooking? Sorry. Sometimes I don't know why this happens, but it's me. Sometimes I just gotta slow down on certain things. What is less harmful? What is less harmful when it's used when it's cold, but it's still better to be dispensed with altogether? And brother will already put the answer in the room. Yeah, butter. Beans, potatoes, bananas, cheap staples for starters. Depends on where you're from. True or false, the oil in olives serves as a laxative and is thus useful for constipation and for consumptives and for those who have inflamed, irritated stomachs, and is better than any drug. True or false? I see a true. I agree with the first part. Should I agree with the last part? Should you? Is it true? Yes. Yes, it is true. Yes, yes. You are correct. It is true. That is true. You know what's funny? I didn't even have to. I was trying to think of some way to make that question more difficult. I was thinking to put something in there. But the thing is when I was thinking about it, I was just like, yeah, but like, what if olive oil actually is useful for this? And so I was just, I didn't come up with anything. Drugs are never recommended in a general sense, but olives are. All right, last question. Yeah, only 3. To be honest, we go over with 5 pages of stuff to read. While setting health reform before individuals, we are not at liberty to present the most advanced propositions regarding it until the people can be taught to prepare health foods that are what? 3 points. There's 3 points to this. Wiki says nourishing. Tasty. What else? There's 3 points. That is correct. That is correct. You got all 3. Yes. That's actually the point, right? Sister White says it should be nourishing. It should be appetizing and inexpensive, right? You don't want to go to somebody and be like, you know, you really need to discard with buying milk. And they're looking at you and they're like, but it cost me $4. And it's just like, yeah, you should dismiss it. And then they go, yeah, but the oat milk you want me to buy is like $17, right? Not that that's an actual situation. Could be an actual situation. But if that were an actual situation, it's like, that's not practical. All right. We will close with prayer. Any final thoughts, comments, or prayer requests before we close? Before we are out of here? Oh, wow, I'm not seeing anything. Nothing today, huh? All right. All right. All right, bros, 'cause that's all that's in here right now. If you can, please kneel. Let's kneel. And please bow your hearts. Heavenly Father, thank you for blessing us with your word, your truth, helping us to look to Jesus, changing our hearts, helping us that our characters reflect him. Thank you for helping us, Father, that really all we really have to do is look in faith and obey. And even as we don't realize and see how it happens, you change our hearts. You make us to the point where it's easier to accept your truth than easier now than it was even before. And so thank you. Please continue to bless all of us with changed hearts, to continue to look to Jesus daily so that we can learn to reflect him and his character and cherishes him and his character and your character. And we ask that you please bless the room, the prayers that are in the room, and all that are in the minds and hearts of your people. And please help us to continue to grow. Thank you for this blessed Sabbath day, and please bless the remainder of it and the new week up ahead of all your children. It is with the help of your Holy Spirit we pray for these things, and it is in Jesus' mighty and precious name that we pray. Amen, amen, and amen. Alrighty.